Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for this video. We'll be talking about best practices for midterms and finals as you're entering your Yale career. These midterms and final seasons will be very long, but they're very doable. And as two seniors, we're going to share some of our best practices and our experiences thus far. So my name is Henry. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. And like I said, I'm a senior majoring in ethnicity, race, and migration. On campus, I do a lot of work with the Community Initiative, which is the FGLI administrative group that tries to meet a lot of the challenges that FGLI students face. And then I do a lot of work in the Latinx community as the members of the GLOTAS, which is the LGBTQ affinity group, and then Ballet Folklorico, which is the Mexican cultural dance group. So that's me.
Yeah, my name is Emily. I'm also a senior, like Henry said, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a cognitive science major from Berlin, Vermont, and I'm in Pauli Murray College. And some of the things I've been involved with on campus over the past few years have been also similar to Henry, a lot of work with first-gen and low-income students. So I've been really heavily involved with an organization called Matriculate, which provides free college advising for low-income and high-achieving high school students and navigating the college application process. I've also been involved with Yale's First Year Scholars Program for the past few summers. And then outside of that, I also do research on campus in Yale's Dog Lab, which is really fun, and work a variety of student jobs also. So I'm really excited to be able to talk with all of you today about these different things. And so I think just to kick off, it's important to just, I think, ask the question, what do midterm and final seasons look like?
So I mean, it really depends on the major, right? I think for me as a ER&M major, primarily, I think my midterm seasons and my final seasons have really been, just a lot of essay writing, a lot of like actual projects and presentations. Very rarely have I ever had like actual sit-down midterms. A lot of the times that comes from the STEM classes that I've taken, or like some of the poli-sci courses also have sit-down midterms and finals. But in some courses, it's actually kind of flexible. Like I know in some cases I've had it so that like I can either take a sit-down final or I can write a final paper. And so you'll learn as time goes on kind of how you work and what's best for you. Like in that case, for instance, doing like a final paper might be better for people who are like really big planners and really like want to take time to process the information and be able to produce something really well. Whereas like people who want to do sit down finals, like I know for me, like it's kind of like, I want to sit down, do this, get it done. Like I'm done with this class. Like I've studied really hard and I just want to get it over with. So you learn like kind of what test taker you are. And then here at Academic Strategies will also kind of help with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing to add to, especially I think in particular to midterms, that at least was kind of shocking for me coming into college is that it's not necessarily just one midterm in the middle of the semester that you might have for a course. So particularly for a lot of STEM courses, you might have 2 or 3 smaller midterms over the course of the semester, and then a final at the end. So midterm season is kind of like a lot of the semester, but you may end up with some weeks where you have multiple midterms, or they might be well spaced out at the beginning of the semester.
Yeah, and I mean it's wild. Like I think like over the course of like 2 months, like you can have like so many different assignments and like tests to take. So like Emily, how do you practice like time management skills, with not only academics, but like with clubs, like sports, jobs, etc.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that I do is at the beginning of the semester, I look at the syllabus and basically plan out in my calendar when my midterms and finals are. And that kind of helps me process like, okay, I have 2 midterms in this 1 week in October. I'm going to have to make sure a couple weeks beforehand that I remember that those are coming up. So I can kind of front load some of my other commitments and activities and assignments, because generally you will have other assignments for courses overlapping with when you might have midterms for another class. So that is something that's really helpful for me in terms of just prioritizing my time and preparing for that like good time management when the week or the 2 weeks coming up to the exam arrive. And then the other thing is also if during actual final season, you have multiple exams in a day. If you do have 3 or more in a day, you don't have to take all 3 in that day. So you'll never have to take more than 3 exams in one day, and can get an excuse to move that other exam, so that you can better prioritize and manage your time.
And I think like the one thing to add to, at least kind of in my experience, like if I know that I have a really heavy week, like I also try to make an active like effort to make sure that like I also block off time to like just like disconnect from everything, like decompress, like be able to take like power naps, or like go to bed earlier and like eat better. Like I think that as like crazy of a time as like academics at Yale is, like having that like plan at the beginning of the semester really allows you to kind of see where your like stress points in the semester and like kind of plan around that. And so on a similar topic, you know, exams are very stressful. So like, how do you prepare, Emily, for like that time period? How do you prepare for specific exams, and like what do you do personally for self-care during that time?
Yeah, I definitely echo the naps. I think that one of my biggest forms of self-care, I'm very much a stress napper. So I'll stay in my bed a lot leading up to exams sometimes. But in terms of actually preparing for exams, one of the biggest things that I think is also important to recognize that's different about college exams than high school exams is that you're not necessarily like regurgitating material on the exam that you've learned through the semester. So for me, one of the biggest ways that I prepare is honestly just by trying to do my best to keep up with the work and the content throughout the semester, so that I'm not necessarily having to cram like 10 weeks of material into my brain in like 3 days. And so with that, a lot of times I make study guides and also just review lectures and course material, and really just set up, I think, a study system there. But study guides have been the biggest thing, particularly in my STEM classes, that have been really helpful. Henry, do you have any experience with that or any other best practices in terms of how you prepare for exams?
Yeah, so something that I was really good at, I remember my sophomore year, because that's when I started getting into like classes for my major. Like I actually made it a point to meet with my TF for every class at least twice in the semester. Once at the beginning just to introduce myself, and the second time to like go over all of the material for either the final paper or like the final midterm, which or like a midterm, which is really good because like first of all, like they get to know you, and then you also can kind of describe, you know, I'm this type of learner. I kind of struggle with these concepts, and so like as you go out through the semester, as you go through like sections and like writing like little assignments, they get to really know you and learn your learning style. And so when you meet with them like right before, they can kind of be like, well, I've noticed this, this, and this throughout your writing, or like that you kind of like struggle in this sense. So like let's focus on that. That way, like they kind of kind of have a sense of like how to better help you. So that's like kind of for me as like a humanities social science person that has a lot of writing to do. That's kind of how I've done it. And then for like actual like sit down exams that I've had, like a lot of the times, this is like something that like I read somewhere was like if you actually teach someone the information, like you actually better retain it. And so like if I'm in like this class with like 3 of my other friends, like we'll just take turns like teaching each other their information. That way you can hear it repeatedly, but also explaining yourself. And like that has been actually so effective for me, especially when it comes to like these things called IDs, where you basically just have to define something and use it in an example. And so like that's kind of like a little study tip that I've been using for the past 2 years that has been really effective. But with that, we were not able to cover everything. But Emily, do you have any final best practices or anything you really want to emphasize on as we close out?
Yeah, I think the only last thing I might add is just if you feel like you're not prepared for an exam or you're really struggling, there are so many resources available to you. going to review sessions, talking to your professors during office hours, and also coming to academic strategies. And like, if this is really overwhelming and like you're having a hard time with time management, which we all do at one point or another, myself definitely included, we can help you work through like pinning down a schedule and making a study plan for your exams and different things like that. So we just want to emphasize that midterms and finals can be sometimes really overwhelming and stressful, and sometimes they can go by pretty smoothly. But in any case, you have lots of help available. So always feel free to reach out to all of the resources that you have. And with that, I think we'll wrap up here.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone.
Awesome.